Welcome into debate night. We had a week off, as you may have noticed last week. Had a little bit of a situation with our YouTube channel, but we're back. We are here, and we've got a three cast member show today. Powerhouse show though. We've got returning champions across the board. I think those trophies do need updated, Silas. I think Hunter's got more wins than
I
one.
can't even see him right now. Where
yeah,
are
we
my
can't see
trophies
anything.
at?
We're flying blind today.
Oh, well, they're on the board. We'll
There
have
we
to
go.
update them. There we go. But
Yeah,
definitely not two. Whoa, this is rough. This is rough.
Unbelievable.
This is unreal.
That's all right.
What is this?
They'll be updated. They will be updated, and we'll make sure they show. We've got interesting. Oh, Silas says he's going to take them all away. Dang.
I'd rather have none than one.
I'd rather have none than an incorrect amount. So yeah, that's good.
We're gonna talk today a little bit about some of the Jonesboro stuff because there was just a few topics. Obviously, this was we had an off week and we missed the show last week, but there are some things we definitely want to get back to from that tournament. But then we're gonna move on to I think one of the big topics, which is the Jomez buyout, and I think that's what a lot of people want to hear everybody's opinion on. But we're gonna hop right into it. Today's analysts, we've got Brodie here as always.
I'll be channeling my inner Lonnie Walker today.
There you go. He had a heck of a game. Hunter is here as well.
Hi, Mom.
Go Lakers, by the way. And then we're joined by Dustin today.
Yeah, did you get that PDF file that I sent you last week?
Too soon. Too soon.
Is it too soon?
Too soon. Dang it.
I know I did risk a -1 like going into the show with that one, but I had to get it out there. We can all laugh now. It's fine now.
Yeah, it's all good. Everything's back to normal now. We're still learning to not flinch at the word PDF, but that's where we're at right now. All right, we're gonna just hop into our first topic here. This one was a little bit pretty debated on social media, and we talked about it a bit on Grip Block. But this side of heaven during Jonesboro, obviously during rounds 1 and 2, some kind of different conditions than normal, I suppose. Wind was way down. Conditions were pretty perfect. And we saw it play it noticeably tougher on day 3 after getting shredded those first 2 days. And the wind was the clear difference. I mean, that was the only different condition that was happening out there. And some were arguing that because the course had no defense other than the wind, then it was flawed. So my question is the course too soft without wind, and can courses rely on wind for defense if they are windy a heavy majority of the time, even if that is a common condition out there? Brodie, what do you think?
Yeah, so I'll jump in by saying, I won't be throwing my OB arguments out because I know people hate hearing the artificial OB arguments, but this is where I think disc golf needs to advance in the course design, and the fact that we need to be able to have different tee pads and we need to be able to have different pin placements. When a course like Jonesboro plays with wind, we saw it plays really well. The way it currently is just set up right now, I think obviously some holes still can be changed, but it plays pretty well. When there is no wind out there, the score separation it just becomes a putting contest. And that's what we saw the first 2 days with 2 people shooting 13 under. And then we saw James Conrad, obviously, with the 17 under. I'll just say this. Think about hole 1. Think about no wind. You see that there's no wind for the forecast, and you're the tournament director or the course designer, whoever you want to be. Think about how hard, we all know what hole 1 is, right? 460, 470 straight. Think about how hard that hole becomes without adding OB, without doing anything, if you now take that pin and tuck it 40 to 45 feet left.
Yeah.
So now it's tucked behind that tree bunker. Now all of a sudden you make it to where it's a little bit trickier. People are gonna, saw off their shots inside that tree bunker. It's gonna be hard to get up and down from there. The fact that we don't have that's I think the biggest problem right now. Is I get that you have to make courses designed a certain way when there is wind involved, because we don't want to have a situation where it's just like you have a hole that's 500 feet and no one can clear it because it's into a headwind. This is where I think different pin placements, different tee pads will advance the sport.
Yeah, certainly a powerful idea. We saw the power of that, not to continually bring up the Wells Fargo Championship the Hunter is at, but we saw the power of that in full effect at that tournament. I mean, there was a par 3 that one day was playing like 170, the next day was playing like 240. And that makes a huge difference. Hunter, do you think it was too soft?
Yeah, I think that to answer your question you just asked me, yes, I think the course in general is too soft. But back to the wind thing, I think Brodie's idea really works well until you have the situation where it's windy in the afternoon and not in the morning, which we see a lot in disc golf. And I think that, Trevor, you actually said it on Grip Lock, or it might not have been on Grip Lock, but you said it at some point where disc golf, there's too many factors that like are somewhat we can't control. We need to control as much as we possibly can. And I think the course design in general is one of those areas. So I think that wind can be a factor in course design, but I think the flaw here was it was one of the main factors of the defense of this course. And I think that should never be the case. I think that, you can factor in the typical conditions. Like let's say a course doesn't drain really well. And you know that when a drive lands 450 feet, if it had rained the day before, it's going to be really muddy. Factor that type of stuff in, but don't have that be the only defense. And it's like, well, if this course is muddy, it's hard, but man, when it dries out, this thing's shreddable. That doesn't make any sense. I think we have to treat wind the same way. Be able to use it a little bit and factor it in, but don't make it the solo defense of a course, because then wind's down, it's shredded.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Dustin, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with both these guys when it comes to, not being able to rely on wind as your solo defense. I mean, if it's obviously in an area where it's very common, it's kind of hard not to factor into your design a little bit. And I do think that the alternate pin position thing certainly could be something to look at. But it could also be something interesting to change up the course. If you're only going to play one course for the event, you're not playing a second course. I think it could be fun just to have alternate pins, even without wind, just to change things up a little bit. As far as Jonesboro being really soft, there are definitely some holes that lack difficulty. And I think you can divide that up between holes that are easy to par, but maybe not necessarily easy to birdie, and then ones that are just like kind of gimme birdies, right? And so like the easy par holes for me at Jonesboro are like 1 and 3. Like you require some precision to get the birdie, but you're pretty much going to score, hardly ever worse than par. There's no OB. It's right there in front of you out in the open. Then you do have like just the plain easier holes. I think like the hole 6 island hole, super easy. Hole 8's pretty much a stock forehand for most right-handed players.
Hole 6 is one of the best holes.
I mean, it's an island hole, but I just feel like everyone sticks it. And I mean, yeah, wind can certainly impact it, but I just feel like not many people are taking a bogey on that hole. Like, I feel like most people are landing the island at least getting par. And then you have a hole like hole 15, which is like a stock right-handed backhand that's under 300 feet. And so even day 3 in the most difficult conditions, over half the field birdied 6, 7, 15, and 40% got 8 and 45% got hole 11. So when you look at those numbers, I do think there's a few holes out there that you could create a little bit better scoring separation with OB or something like that. But I also don't like the random OB bunkers on a hole like hole 4, for example. So yeah, I think there definitely could be some tweaking on the course, but I don't want to see it like completely overhauled because I personally am like kind of a fan of this, this side of heaven.
Yeah, I mean, fair point. I mean, even if you think 6 is tough, if over half the field birdied it in the windiest conditions of the weekend, I mean, there's something to be said about that. I think that it's difficult.
Can I say something real quick?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
If Eagle would have played it as easy as Dustin's saying right now, he would have won by 1. Or actually, he would have won by 2. Eagle took a double in the final round.
I mean, that's one person.
It's one player.
Yeah.
One player that was vying for the win at the end. I'm just saying, like, it's not. I think 6 is one of the better holes.
This is where I mean, in fairness, on 6 there is scoring separation on 6 because you can go
separation.
The big issue, like Dustin mentioned, I think the biggest issue is even if a course is playing where it's hard to make birdie, if it's still easy to make par when you don't make the birdie, then that's not good enough. The thing, Brodie, you said you wanted to shy away from the OB, but it's hard to shy away from it when it like ultimately that
I'm not going to shy away from our next question.
I was
just shying away from it.
Ultimately, that is what creates separation a lot of the time.
Can I respond a little bit? Like, I think for me, it's like, when you look at Jonesboro, you have holes like hole 5 where it's like a risk reward shot to go for the birdie, which creates a scoring separation based on like whether you want to take that risk or whether you just want to lay up and take the 3. You have a hole like hole 10 that requires an accurate shot off the tee.
Do you think hole 5 is a good hole? The way it's set up right now?
Yeah, I think it's a risk versus reward hole.
I would argue that it's a bad hole because the only people that are taking a bogey on that hole are the people that are actually playing it for birdie. The people that play for a par are never not getting a par. So that's where, to me, you need to make hazard or OB everything short of the drop zone. So now when I'm throwing a little pitch hyzer to throw another pitch hyzer to make par, I actually still have to throw a good shot. No one is stressed on that. If you're playing that hole for 3, that is not a stressful tee shot. So to me, that's a bad hole. The way that it's currently designed is a bad hole.
Yeah, I think kind of what I was trying to just get at is I think Jonesboro has some really good holes. Like I actually like the finishing stretch. I think hole 14 has like a pretty tight window to hit the score. So like there's some really good things on this course, but I do think that like I think we're all kind of at a consensus at this point that we could probably use some OB or some different things to kind of add some defense to this course that we're not relying on wind all the time.
Has anyone played Jonesboro here?
No.
I think that's also the biggest thing is like playing a course and actually seeing how it plays and then watching players play it. It's vastly different. And that's where, like, Dustin, you probably didn't even know about hole 5. You wouldn't know it's super easy if you're playing it for par, because that's something that's never discussed in commentary. That's not something that they walk through. And so, like, I think that's the big issue right now is sometimes people, I think, are missing the fact of how easy some of these holes are played because they just haven't played them. They're just watching it.
I think the consensus with the Jonesboro property is that there's potential there. It just needs a few tweaks, and they can work on that. All right. Well, one other thing about this is the whole argument of the soft versus not soft is kind of defeated if this point kind of stands. Quick points update: Brodie and Dustin are at 300s at 2. But a large part of the too soft argument that we're kind of mentioning is contested by fans that claim disc golf is most exciting when scoring potential is very good, such as players being able to shoot rounds like James Conrad 17 under. This is a very probably the heaviest argument against. And so my question is disc golf best suited for low scoring, or would the game benefit from a style of play that kept players closer to par and made birdies more of a commodity? Dustin. Or I guess, wait. I had Dustin written here. It probably... I switched up the order on my thing. Did I have Hunter going second?
Probably Big Hunt.
I'm sorry, Dustin
went third on the last
one. It's all good, bro.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to Hunter. I had the order different.
All right. I personally, I don't think the score in relation to par is the cause or anything like that of this. I think score in relation to par is kind of a pointless thing other than outside optics when it really comes down to it. What makes disc golf exciting in situations like this is realistically the lack of separation at the top of the field. And I think typically what you see that on is courses that are playing softer, which is where the lower to par kind of comes into play. But as the sport develops, I think right now what we're seeing is to have those kind of electric, exciting finishes where there's 8, 9, 10 people in it going into the final day. We have to have really soft courses. As the field develops, which we're seeing, and players get better and better, you can have the better version of disc golf, in my opinion, where you have the possibilities of every hole you can make birdie, par, bogey, double, triple. Maybe not every hole, but a lot of holes to where there is that scoring separation. But then there's like gonna be 8, 9 players that are just playing the course extremely well. And what that provides is an electric finish that's not someone gets a 6-stroke lead and it's over. Because then you come down the stretch and, if you have a 6-stroke lead with 5 to go on a lot of these courses and there's not OB, there's not scoring separation, it's a boring finish just as much as it could be an electric finish. But if there's that scoring separation, 6 strokes with 5 to go is nothing.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Dustin, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think this all comes down to balance in the end, like with all things. I think as long as you have variety throughout the course of the season, I don't mind there being some situations where scoring is high, and then opposite situations where scoring is a little bit more rare because it kind of makes the event a little bit like standing out, I guess you could say. I do think there has to be like some limits, though. Like you can't have a course that's just like plain too soft. Like that's a reason why the Memorial is no longer on the Disc Golf Pro Tour, for example, is because it does just like trend like too extreme in one direction, right? And I do think you have to kind of cut out those extremities. But I think, on average, it's fine to have some variance throughout the season. I do think that scoring, I think Americans just love scoring, right? And I mean, disc golf is a very heavy American sport. And the one reason why a sport like soccer, for example, isn't, as important as other sports is because of the low scoring. Now, I get this is an oversimplification. I get people like normal golf, and that obviously doesn't have crazy high scoring like disc golf has. But I just know that people in the American audience just seem to get excited when they see people score points, or in this case, strokes. So I think it ultimately just comes down to diversity throughout the course of a season being played. I also think it's nice to have just a mix of holes throughout a course where you can see that stroke separation. And yeah, but I do typically trend towards wanting to see holes that demand a high skill ceiling, where only the best shots are going to get rewarded, because it makes things more special, and it makes the good separate from the great. So I kind of like the trend towards the less scoring, but I can understand some balance throughout the season.
Yeah, balance is certainly important, and you definitely can have events that differ in that not everything has to have the same template. Brodie, what do you think about the scoring?
I mean, I definitely want to talk to someone that loves seeing for a 3-round tournament, the winner be like 38, 39 under par. And I think I mentioned something where I talked about this on Tour Life, where after the first round, the top 10, so they played 180 holes between between all of them. I believe there was like 3 bogeys. The rest were par and birdies. So 180. I mean, I think that to me, when I'm watching something, I can see, I maybe can see how some people are like, oh, I love seeing the birdies. But when you're getting tons and tons of birdies and then throwing in some pars here and there, the birdies don't matter nearly as much as if you're getting tons and tons of pars and you're sprinkling in birdies and then also sprinkling bogeys. The bogeys hurt a lot and the birdies help a lot. And so there's this nice balance between the two. And if we're only getting a bunch of birdies and pars, I don't think you get that nice balance. The other thing you're missing too, kind of like what Dustin was saying, is when shots that are really great get the same score that shots that are okay, that's also something that we're missing. And then on top of that, the last thing I'll say is kind of to Hunter's point, some of these courses are starting to get really good down the stretch because the holes are actually good score separators. You will get punished with bad shots, and it's tough to get birdies without throwing good shots. Those make good finishes. But if we had more of those holes throughout the entire course, now all of a sudden it's exciting back and forth. You're going to see people jumping up the leaderboard, jumping down the leaderboard early in the tournament. There's a lot more movement, and then also just more stress, more thought that goes into the game from the player side, which I think will also bring out very interesting results. Last point, if you ever show up at MA3 or MA tournament and watch those guys down the stretch and see what kind of decisions they make when they're like in the lead, it's probably very fascinating. I've seen it multiple times. It's very fascinating to see. And if we can just kind of take that to the pro level, but have them do it on a very high skill level course, I think to me, that's going to be very interesting. You see it on people doing it on easy courses at a lower skill level. So, I mean, it would translate over, right? I mean,
I think, it's a thought. All right. I think that you have the right idea where like the problem is disc golf has been built on a foundation of heavy birdies, but you're right to where once everybody's making all these birdies, they become less important. And, right now, if birdie is like there are rounds where birdie is the most common score that a player is going to take on a hole, right? And if that's the most common score a player is going to take on a hole, then they're not really going to take many eagles. So really, so you might get one exciting eagle around, but then it's like, okay, and par is already boring because it's so given. You need to have players sit more commonly at par so that the positive and negative side is much more common, or much less common, but much more exciting. The birdie all of a sudden becomes much more important, and the bogey also becomes more important because there's a shift of 3 different scores versus just par birdie, that shift of 2 different scores. And
is this a terrible? Sorry, finish.
No, go ahead. What's the analogy?
I was gonna say, this might be a terrible analogy, but are free throws exciting to watch in a basketball game in the beginning of the game, like in the first half?
No.
Because you're assuming they should make it.
Yes.
It's electric when they miss.
It's not at the beginning of the game.
No, not at the beginning of the game.
I get what you're getting at. You're saying birdies aren't exciting if they're expected to make them until the end of the tournament.
Until the end of when there's pressure and stuff. And so, I don't know. Again, I'm not that person, so I would love to hear from the person that thinks watching someone go crazy. But like a James Conrad, like that, I know we're about to get to that. A round like that could have been a 12 out under round on a very hard course, and he could have picked up 7 strokes.
Yeah,
or something ridiculous.
It's all relative. It's all what people expect, and I think a big problem too is the field expects it too. Like if you put, a lot of times you take the players to Winthrop, and a lot of them will hate it there because
they hated Austin too because it's so hard
because of how brutal the scoring separation is, and they're trained to see their scorecard in a certain way at this point. They're trained to know that I got to go double digits if I'm going to win tournaments.
Can I ask
there's also this notion too of where you should be able to park every single hole. And every hole should be easily birdieable. And I don't know. I disagree, but I'm sure there's people that do agree.
It's an interesting one. What are you saying, Dustin?
I was just going to ask a quick question to Brodie because I mean, again, we were talking about kind of like, balance throughout the course, like, have some holes that have some crazy score separation, but then having a couple out there that maybe are a little bit easier to score on. Do you think that those holes, like let's say you have a completely balanced course, Brodie, like a hypothetical.
Real quick though, Dustin, I don't want to have any hole where you're either taking a birdie or a par. I don't want any holes that are, when I say easy, like an easy hole to me is like what you said, like hole 6, in the sense that it is easy to, in the sense of like what it requires. It requires 300-foot shot. It is easy to birdie if you throw one good shot.
But there is a chance of.
I mean, I played that hole over par. Yeah. Tons of people, good players, play that hole over. I never hole like 15. That little one that actually the lead card actually fumbled a little bit, where it's just a little stock like 290-foot hyzer. The only defense of that hole is elevated basket on somewhat of a hill. But that hole, every player going to that, unless you play atrocious, I don't even know what word I was trying to say. Atrociously bad, you're taking a par or birdie. I think that's a bad hole. But continue. Sorry.
No, my question would just be do you think that there is pressure added on those types of holes when you know that you're supposed to get them, and like maybe you're only like a stroke or two behind the leader final round? Like, do those holes then get a little bit of value where it's like, oh snap, I'm supposed to get this, like this is a gimme, and if I don't, oh crap, like I've just lost everything.
It's like the free throw argument.
It's exactly. It's a different, when you different kind of pressure, and also the one thing that's taking out of it is strategy. That's the one thing that's removed is when you have an easy hole like that. Yes, you stand up to the tee and you're like, I have to get this hole. That is a different type of pressure. But the pressure that really, I think, builds and stuff, and we see it a little bit with some of these guys towards the end of the tournaments, of where they don't have to do that, or they're not used to doing that, and then they make terrible decisions, right? That's what we're not seeing. We're not seeing people have to make good decisions. Someone that actually does a really good job of this is like Paul. Like if you go back to Worlds last year, right? The decision making that he did down the stretch at Worlds put him in a spot to win that tournament. He did things that other people probably wouldn't have done in his spot to put him in a situation to win that tournament. There's other people that when they get put in that spot, they don't know how to act, and then maybe they fumble it, right? So I think that's the thing is like, I want to see people have to make decisions of, should I throw this shot or this shot, and not my whole argument. It's what you're basically saying is darts, right? I step up to a dartboard. I'm one of the world's best dartboard players in the world, and someone says hit a triple 20. Yes, there's a lot of pressure on me hitting a triple 20, but I'm just going into muscle memory mode, right? There's not any thought of like, ooh,
I got you.
What's going on here?
Course management is certainly a big part of the essence of golf, and it'd be nice to see it incorporated more heavily as the years go on. But we're gonna move away from that.
You're gonna see it at OTB.
Yeah, certainly. We're gonna move away from that and head into some of the big news that just broke recently, which was the acquisition of Jomez Pro by the Disc Golf Pro Tour. Some people might have seen this coming. Some people probably shocked. But my question is, what does the Jomez Pro acquisition say about the future of disc golf broadcasting? Is post-produced golf on the unstoppable path to extinction? Dustin, lead off for us.
I mean, for me, there's no extinction in sight when it comes to post-produced coverage. I think it just has way too much value when it comes to the viewership and the quality of the coverage. What the acquisition does do, though, is it brings everything underneath one umbrella. So you're combining the DGN live experience with top-notch post-produced coverage to go alongside of it. And it's one of those things where I don't know why you would ever want to do away with post-produced coverage when it brings in numbers that you can use to elevate your pitch deck to sponsors and such. Also, you're alienating a huge part of your audience if you get rid of it. I think it would just be like a PR and a financial decision that could be very disastrous if you in post-produced coverage. I think the future of this golf broadcasting for the Pro Tour, to kind of get to the second part of the question, is all about just combining the resources that the tour already has with what Jomez can bring to the table. And I think that this can both make the live product and post-produced product better. It gives you more manpower, more cameras, more creative minds to come up with ideas to help improve the quality of the product. And, eventually maybe this could include more cards getting covered, multiple streams running at once, better shoulder content to fill like gaps in the broadcast. And I do think that perhaps we could see post-produced coverage get delayed a little bit more to help try to push, a little bit of traffic to live, but it's not going to go away entirely. And I think there's something that needs to be said, that post-produced viewers are not just going to totally transfer to live. If you take post-produced away, you're just going to lose that audience. And I think that those numbers are just too valuable to lose.
Yeah, a lot of good points there. Brodie, what do you think?
How did we not see this coming, by the way? No one talked about the fact that they just picked up FPO coverage, right? But they paid a crap ton of money for MPO coverage, but didn't, like, there was no mention of, how do we not see, like, that to me, when we had Jeff Spring on, I was like, when they picked up FPO, we should have been like, huh? So, because this obviously was in the works for a long, long time. And so, whatever. I'm surprised that, Trevor, you didn't pick up on that. I'm just going to throw that out there. I feel like
Trevor, come on, man.
I feel like you should have saw that coming. But
I didn't see that tie-in. I mean, we kind of like thought this could happen someday, but I didn't really pick that up.
We just kind of glossed that over when they said like they're doing FPO coverage. It's like that made no sense for them to do. So anyways, to answer the question, what do we see with the future of disc golf broadcasting? I think Jomez has created some of the best pieces of disc golf content out there. You guys mentioned on Grip Lock their piece that they did at USDGC. I think their piece they did at the beginning of the season at Vegas was incredible. Having those pieces that they can now insert in to the live broadcast is going to actually be able to tell. I think they do a great job of storytelling, right? And I think that's something that Jonathan has a super passion in and skill with their like player lead card kind of intros that they've done in the past. I think all those things are pieces of content that are missing right now in the live broadcast, where they can be putting those pieces of content on versus us seeing them playing tic-tac-toe in the sand while there's a backup, right? So I think that is going to be the huge thing, because as far as the actual quality and all the other stuff that goes with the people on the ground, nothing's changing, right? They've been using Jomez cameras already this season, so you're not going to see more shots or anything like that this season. As far as the unstoppable path to extinction in the post-production, I don't know. This is still such an interesting one because it's still so unique to disc golf in the fact that people will decide they could watch live. Like there are people that could watch live and they are refusing to watch live so they can watch this post-production thing. That doesn't necessarily really exist, or I haven't really seen that in other sports. Other sports I see, I got to do something with the kids this weekend, or I've got a work arrangement or something, so I can't watch the game. I'm just going to tune into it later. I don't see people that are literally like, I could watch it if I wanted to, but I'm refusing to. So I don't really know what this is going to do. But it would be interesting to see if Jomez, this is what I'll say, if Jomez becomes more of a outside content creator, kind of doing some of the other content that they've done, the putting, the practice rounds, all that stuff. If that's what the Jomez YouTube video channel is, and then the actual post-produced stuff lives somewhere else on Disc Golf Pro Tour's YouTube channel, because it makes sense more to live there than actually on Jomez, and Jomez just kind of be the place where they're like, hey, we can really start building up some of these players on tour. Because again, I think in the past, Jomez was really focused on their people, right? Outside of the actual post-production stuff.
Yeah, that would be interesting. Interesting transition. I hadn't really thought about that. Hunter, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Dustin and Brodie hit a lot of the main points, just right on, hit the nail on the head, we'll say. First off, extinction of post-production, not going to happen. Could it change slightly how we are used to it? Absolutely. I don't, but Dustin nailed it, where that's too valuable of an audience that we can't alienate them and get rid of them. Now we could see it head more in the direction of other sports where it's more so a highlight package type thing. Like we've seen them do with like Paul when he shot 18 under, where like, if you're going to do a lead card coverage and two guys pop off, right, and two guys just fall out of the tournament, it could be a situation where maybe post-produce, now that it's owned by the Pro Tour, maybe they're using all live cameras to create this post-produce. So maybe they're able to create a post-produce that's telling the story of the whole round, and it's more of like a highlight package type thing. I think there could be some changes, but post-produced itself is too valuable. There's too many viewers that stumble on it through YouTube that we can't cut that off. So I could definitely see the delay happen. I think one value, obviously, Jomez adding to the live stream, one thing that's being overlooked too is the talent of their people, specifically their graphics people. I think that can be really easily implemented into the live stream. And you now have people that can pre-create graphics that can really up the game for the live coverage, and obviously the different pieces. But another thing, to Brodie's point of the content creation side, before we've talked about where Jomez and some of these other brands, their whole brand identity relies on the ability to get players. It's a lot easier to do that when you're the Pro Tour versus an outside brand trying to get players, because now players actually do have an obligation to the Pro Tour. Players could actually sign contracts. I don't know if it's already in place, giving their name, image, likeness rights to the Pro Tour. And then if the Pro Tour is telling you got to show up to this putting game for Jomez, whole different ball game than some outside party asking you to be a part of it. So I think that's a big power play as well.
Does
for
the
Jomez
Does the Pro Tour have that authority?
Not right now.
I say
No.
not right now.
But they could.
They have the authority of our name and likeness, so they can throw highlights and do all that stuff on that.
I think,
but I could see that being something thrown in, right?
Yeah.
Where we all decide like, hey, this is something that is going to elevate disc golf. We need to all be a part of it. So we could all agree to do like 2 events a year.
That kind of moves into my next question. Quick points update: Brodie and Dustin at 10, Hunter at 8 right now. But my next question is kind of, what do you think the Pro Tour plans to do with the newly acquired Jomez brand? And how will this relationship mature over the next few years? Will they eventually destroy the Jomez name for full absorption? What's that relationship going to look like? Some of you mentioned a few ideas, but how do you think that's basically all going to pan out? Back to Brodie.
Yeah, this is definitely an interesting question, because I don't know if there really is a plan, like a 10-year plan of what this looks like that has been announced. I know Jeff really didn't mention anything. It seemed like they kind of were just going to keep doing what they're doing, but now the Pro Tour owns everything. It didn't really sound like there's going to be this big overhaul of what Jomez is. One thing that is kind of a little interesting was there was a company called Scratch, SKRATCH, and they were posting really awesome content from the PGA Tour and doing cool content. And a lot of their comments were saying, oh my gosh, the PGA Tour needs to do this. Like, this is, well, the PGA Tour owned Scratch and no one knew about it. It wasn't really announced. And I could see that could be kind of this thing of where, 5 years from now or whatever, people don't, some people coming into the sport don't really know the Disc Golf Pro Tour owns Jomez, but they're able to kind of put out content that attracts a different audience, right? Because we all know Jomez attracts the post-production audience, and the Disc Golf Pro Tour, the DGN, attracts like the live audience. And now if the Pro Tour can utilize both those things to push whatever they want to push, I could see that. The stuff that's really interesting to me is like Jomez is keeping their Patreon. There's stuff like that that's still kind of, I don't really understand why. Yeah, so I'm not entirely sure how that's going to all look, but it is interesting.
That's an excellent point on the Scratch Golf thing. I don't think I knew they were owned by the PGA Tour, but it makes sense because you cannot use footage from them unless you get their permission.
Rights, yeah.
So that's a very good point. I didn't really think about that avenue. Obviously, people right now will know about the Jomez acquisition, but like new fans as they enter won't know about that right away unless they make it apparent. So that's an interesting way to think about it. Hunter, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, 2 things. First off, the Scratch Golf thing. I think a key thing with that is, from my understanding of that whole thing, a lot of the content that was being created, it was like the PGA Tour already had like brand identity, name, image, like they already had all that established for years and years. And a lot of that content that's attractive to a younger audience wouldn't have really worked with the audience that's already following the PGA Tour. So I don't think that scenario makes sense for the Pro Tour, because the Pro Tour is still establishing that. In my opinion, I think the main Jomez YouTube channel over the next 5 to 10 years will be transitioned into the Disc Golf Pro Tour post-produced coverage, because why would you create a new post-produced coverage YouTube channel? But you do want that branding to be there. But I think the Jomez branding can live on its own channel, and that's where the putting games and stuff like that can exist, and highlights and stuff like that can all flow in through there, all that stuff. I think that all makes a lot of sense. And to Brodie's point of like the Patreon, they're keeping a lot of stuff the same. In my opinion, I think there is a 5 to 10 year plan in the minds of Jeff Spring and them. They just are smart enough not to release that to the public because they don't want the outrage. So Patreon, why would they get rid of it right now when they are probably going to get rid of it in the future? But it's like right now, the best thing to make this mitigation, to make this all flow together and keep everyone happy and, sitting there, is to say nothing's changing. We're going to keep operating the same way. And over the next calendar year, they're going to keep operating the same way. and then you'll notice one little change, and then one little change, and then one little change, and they all happen slowly until next thing you know, 10 years from now, we look back and Jomez doesn't look anything like the Jomez that just got acquired right now. That seems to be how the Pro Tour operates, and that's what I'm expecting personally out of this acquisition.
Yeah, the Pro Tours have proven to be the masters of the subtle change leading to a major change. Dustin, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, there's no way you're just going to destroy the Jomez brand name, because the brand, I think, just has so much value and recognizability within the disc golf space. And I think it's kind of just so massive that it would be a waste to kind of just let that brand go, at least in the short term. Maybe long term, you find a way to subtly transition it into like a Disc Golf Pro Tour branded thing. I imagine Disc Golf Pro Tour is going to waste zero time getting their branding more involved on the Jomez post-produced coverage, like immediately, like this weekend, maybe even. As far as what DGP does with Jomez, I think at a basic level, they're just going to be able to leverage those numbers to boost their pitch decks for brand deals, sponsorships, and advertising. Because now Jomez is no longer a third-party partner; it's owned by the tour, and so it brings all those numbers under one umbrella to target deals and stuff like that. Secondly, as I've already kind of mentioned, you're adding experienced staff to the tour, which is going to help both post-produced and the live broadcast. I think eventually these additional resources could lead to a point where maybe you can cover more cards and have multiple streams. So think of this, like, what if you keep the DGN subscription model for your diehard fans so they can still have that if they want to watch like additional cards, but the main broadcast is free. So you get the best of both worlds of having a low barrier to entry to watch the Disc Golf Pro Tour, but you can still have your hardcore fans be able to, pay you that subscription money to see additional content. But I do think a lot of it is going to come down to the additional content that they're going to be able to create, whether that be podcasts. You got the game shows like the putting game. There's also that one that they did. I think it's like at the country club on hole 16, where they just throw random discs like at the island, see if they can stick it. Like, that's going to be content that you're going to be able to, use and leverage the live broadcast, but also have live in a post-produced environment. And so it's just bringing more resources, bringing more quantity and quality to the product. And yeah, I think that's eventually how it's going to shake down.
I think you mentioned, Dustin, a really good point is the advertising implications are very, very large. When you're talking about the numbers that they're going to be able to add into their advertising decks to sell to companies, it is invaluable. I mean, they're going to have
I think
a
they were
lot
already
more leverage.
doing that.
They were.
Were they already doing it?
They were already doing that.
Their decks included Jomez for a few years.
Yeah, and people were just making a split. But can I add two things real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, the first one is I agree with Hunter. I think, kind of to expand on what he was saying with the Patreon stuff, is Disc Golf Network already kind of has a Patreon, right? And I think as companies get bigger and bigger, they go away from Patreon. You don't see these massive companies have a Patreon, but they still have like a subscription thing that you pay for, right? And so I could see that makes a lot of sense of where if all the stuff that they're giving right now to Jomez Patreon, they could do that to DGN subscribers. But I could see that if they would have done that right away, it probably would have pissed off a lot more people that are like, what the heck? I don't have a Jomez Patreon anymore. Right. So I could see that going away. It makes no sense to have a Jomez Patreon that you own and then also have a Disc Golf Network subscription model. Makes no sense.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was, I'm still not convinced. Jeff Spring kind of alluded that this wasn't the case. I still am not convinced that this whole thing just happened because Jomez they got over their heels. They got their head over their heels. Is that
over their head?
In over their head?
Yeah.
No, the skates. Over their skates or their skis. Over their ski. No, you guys aren't skiers. They got their head. They got their head over their skis. Like their head over their skis or something, and they're just like flying down the hill. I'm not convinced. I'm convinced. I'm kind of still not convinced that this whole thing happened because they were not able to pay.
That's what Ultiworld said.
Yeah, that's what it's being alleged.
Well, I know, but Jeff Spring basically said like that information was not accurate.
Well, I think, in my opinion, I'm pretty sure Disc Golf Pro Tour would have wanted to acquire Jomez much earlier than now, if they could have. And I think that Jomez just felt like they could be better off on their own and probably refuted the idea of the Disc Golf Pro Tour purchase him. And now all of a sudden, it's like a perfect recipe for it to come together. I agree with you, Brodie. I
don't know about the perfect recipe. Let me
Here,
throw a scenario real quick.
The bottom line is,
go ahead.
Trevor, real quick, one scenario. Let's just say tentacles. We think tentacles is the next big thing. Okay, so we buy 5,000 tentacle hats, we buy 10,000 tentacle jerseys, and we buy 25,000 tentacle discs.
Yeah.
Right. We throw $250,000 into
See you
tentacle
later, everybody.
merch. And then a month later, we have sold $5,000 worth of tentacle merch.
Tough.
And then all of a sudden someone comes in and says, hey, you know what? We like what you guys are doing. We'll buy you guys out for $1 million. Are we taking that or not taking that?
Probably, yeah.
I rest my case.
Were you arguing against that just a second ago?
I already
I'm
ordered the
saying
tentacle merch.
No, I'm saying I think that's what because Dustin was trying to say, like, I think he just said it came to get. I think the reason it happened is because I don't think Jomez was able to pay the Disc Golf Pro Tour.
Yes.
So the Disc Golf Pro Tour.
That's what we were all getting at. I
We're
think
all at the
you
same
started
point.
your argument saying that you
No, Brodie was saying that Jeff Spring was kind of alluding that
No,
that's
Jeff
not the
Spring
case.
is saying that
but
wasn't
Brodie
the
was
case.
saying he thinks.
I
it
mean,
was
the bottom
case.
line is like the acquisition has gone through. They now control the entire narrative. You know, they're gonna they're gonna go how they want to go. Anyways, let's move on to the elimination round.
Conspiracy theory.
Brodie and Dustin, we've been moving on. Hunter is gone. You can get in your car and drive back to the office. We're moving on to the finals of Brodie and Dustin tied at 13.
Oh, jeez.
This is gonna be an intense final round. Let's move on to the rapid fire round. All right, Brodie and Dustin. This is gonna be real interesting. Tied up at 13 points. Yeah, we haven't had this finals matchup yet. We've got some interesting, pretty subjective final round topics. I'm trying to make them like, you know, not necessarily one right answer, very subjective topics so that you guys can really flesh out arguments. We're going to start off with our first one. I'm thinking of a number between 1 and 10. Dustin, what do you think it is?
6.
Brodie.
The problem is I know you picked the same number time, but I've never the finals that much. So it's like I don't know what the number is, but I think it's like 4.
I actually went with 5 today. I decided to switch my number, which is right in between both of you, but we'll go Price is Right style, and Brodie didn't go over. So
this is a new rule that's just been added out of nowhere. I'm not liking this.
Brodie, do you want to go first or second?
Let me go first.
Okay.
There you go.
Brodie's going to lead off. First question. Paul McBeth so far this season has been on a winless streak. Not been a good season for him. He's about to head over to Europe at this point. Now, this has been a narrative that it has been carried from year to year. We've seen this before, but this season it seems a little bit different. The field's getting stronger. There hasn't been much challenge for the win. At what point would Paul McBeth fans and media should we be sounding the alarm bells on Paul McBeth this season if he continues on this path? Brodie, what do you think?
I mean, I think it's just you got to come to the realization that there are a lot of really good disc golfers now. And I'm still not in the camp that Paul has gotten worse. I'm still not in the camp that Ricky has gotten worse. I'm still not in the camp that everyone has gotten worse, and that's why ratings are lower, right? I'm not in that camp. I'm in the camp that the field has just gotten a lot better. And you cannot show up to a tournament and have a B+ or A- game and win tournaments anymore. And if you do have a B+, not even cash. So I think it's not so much the sounding the alarm bells. I think it's the realizing that the way that disc golf is going now is there are a lot of freaking really good disc golfers that can win on any given week. And what we're seeing with Calvin, for example, to me, what Calvin is doing this year, when you fast forward 10 years from now, that is going to be more impressive if he continues it than some of the other things we've seen in the years past, because he's doing it against of a bunch of people that can win versus doing against a field of maybe 1, maybe 2 guys that can win. So that's the thing is I don't think Paul is just having like an awful season of where he's just playing terrible. I mean, I'm sure he's would like to be playing better, but it's real easy. Simon even said it. He's like, it's real. The difference between a top 10 and like outside of 30th place is very small now.
Yeah, certainly cutthroat. Dustin, what do you think?
I mean, I think there is some truth to what Brodie's saying about like just the field getting better, but that was the case last year too. And McBeth was doing a lot better last year than this year. And so what I'm going to say here is I think you do need to start ringing the alarm bells, because even when McBeth wasn't getting a ton of wins last year, he was at least in contention pretty often. And he was pretty consistently placing within the top 10. He actually only placed outside the top 10 3 times on tour last year at Elite Series or higher events. This year, McBeth has only placed the top 10 twice, the 6 tour events that he's attended. His last 3 finishes are 15th, 20th, and 25th. And at no point has he really been in contention in the last few events that he played. So it's very clear that Paul is off to a rocky start this season. By this time of the season in years past, he would have had at least a win, and he would have been a consistent top 10 finisher. And he's not even getting in the top 10 right now. So that's really my big thing. I feel like we've barely even spoken about Macbeth, as there's been so many more prevailing storylines for other players. Even like the whole thing about Macbeth going to McBeast mode for majors and that being his primary focus, that didn't happen at the Champions Cup. He came 20th. So I think that right now, yeah, you need to be a bit concerned, but it's still early in the season. And if he winds up snagging a major or gets like an Elite Series win or two later on this season, he'll rejoin the conversation of current top players again, and people will kind of forget about this slow start. But this is certainly not what you expect from a guy who's often touted as the GOAT.
Yeah, I see the point both ways. I agree, Brodie. I think disc golf is trending that way, but Dustin, you make an excellent point where it was kind of that way last year as well, and you brought
it's more this year.
But
it's even more.
And every year we're seeing exponential growth, I think, in that effect. So it's tough to necessarily say like what the norm looks like, but it is true, Dustin. Also, like you mentioned, it doesn't take long to reverse the effects of a winless streak, and we're just going to have to see how things continue to play out. But it's getting tough. You have to have your best golf. Brodie said it. You can't.
Have you guys ever heard of Aiden Scott?
Not until this year.
Yeah, he got 7th at Champions Cup.
Yeah.
No idea. He's just like an 18-year-old kid. I mean, that's my point, is like you're getting more of those all throughout. And Ricky hasn't even played a tournament this year, really.
Yeah.
Like one of the best players in the world's not even in the mix.
Yeah.
Everyone almost should like be dropping down the leaderboard another spot.
Well, this segues well into the next topic, which is, if we mentioned the field's exponential growth and new players popping up. So my question is, Dustin, you kind of said, the Dustin or the Macbeth narrative hasn't been covered as much with like Calvin and Gannon and certain other players taking up some of the news. Well, my question is, which player is having the most under the radar season so far, a successful season that is? Who do you think it is, Dustin?
So this one might go well for me or it might not. We're going to see.
Okay.
But I'm actually going to pick Ezra Aderhold. And the reason why I'm going to pick him. All right. So I'm picking Ezra because while he doesn't have any wins yet this season, he came second at Las Vegas. And then after like a tough Waco performance, he bounced back with 2 6th-place finishes in a row at Austin and Texas States. He finished just outside of the top 10 at MCO and Jonesboro. And I feel like he should be considered a top 10 player, currently ranked 7th in the points, but he's only 17th in the UDIS World Rankings. I know that we have our issue with the UDIS World Rankings, yada, yada, yada.
He's in our power rankings top 10.
Exactly, yeah. So I feel like this might be the best start to a season he's had since he got picked up from Discraft if you're just looking at pure results. So I'm going with him. Then I'm going to get 2 honorable mentions, but not go deep into them because that's my main answer. James Proctor definitely is starting to get noticed more. And I'm going to go Jessica Weiss because we never talk about her in FPO, but she has a ton of top 5 and top 10 finishes this year and is doing really well.
Yeah. Ezra, very good pick. Very good pick. I think Brodie wanted that pick as well.
That was a sneaky move too, to do some honorable mentions at the end too, to try even take more of my picks.
All right,
however,
Brodie,
play the
backup,
game.
do you have a backup plan?
Well, I will say this. I'm going to switch over to FPO because I think Ezra is the obvious choice on the MPO side. The real one thing that his Achilles heel is he just hasn't won a big event yet. And I think when that happens, I think you'll get into that conversation.
Yeah.
So the FPO side, I'm glad you went with Jessica Weiss because she is not my pick. I think the obvious pick here is Holland Hanley, someone that just moved over to Discraft. I think the FPO side can get a little bit dominated with the conversation of how dominant Kristen Tatar has been. Where is Paige? Where is Katrina? And then some of the newer winners with Cy and Kat Merch on the last one. She's kind of fallen under the radar a little bit. And the fact that she was 3rd at LVC, 5th at Austin, 4th at Texas State, 5th at Music City, 8th at Blue Ridge, 6th at Champions Cup, and 4th at Jonesboro. With some of those events, her being in contention towards the end of the stretch. I think she's another player that once she gets that first W under her belt, then I think that will open it up a little bit for her, give her a little bit more of that confidence and that experience that she needs down the stretch. But her game has flourished. She has a very powerful forehand, an incredible backhand as well. The real one thing that she is kind of missing a little bit is that trusty putt down the stretch. But yeah, I think she's someone that doesn't really get talked too much. And I think her game, kind of like we did with Ella Hansen a little bit last year, of where Ella can compete with Kristen. I think
Yeah.
her game can compete well with Kristen as well on some of these bigger courses.
Holland, I think, is one of the, is I would argue she could be the highest ceiling player right now in FPO, because you see the athleticism and really strong backhand and forehand play. Need a little bit of consistency there, but it's mostly the putt. If she can figure out the putt, which we say that all the time, so it's tough for me to feed into that narrative. But it is one of those things where like you can flip a switch. Players do improve their putting. I mean, Katrina Allen these days is a very solid putter in my opinion, and that was not the case early in her career. So I will say ceiling is very high there, but yeah, Ezra was a fantastic pick. Obviously, sometimes leading off has its advantage. You're now up 1 point, Dustin, but Brodie does lead off on our last question. I think this one's kind of interesting. James Conrad obviously fired a 17 under. Anytime somebody touches that 16, 17, or 18 under mark, the discussion of where is this round rank in best all time, starts being brought up. People start talking about ratings again, to my dismay. But Brodie, where do you think James Conrad 17 under ranks amongst the best rounds of all time?
So I believe I've played most of the courses that these best rounds of all time have been like discussed. So I'm kind of going it off of like how I feel the difficulty of the courses are to shoot that number. We just had a conversation about how we thought Jonesboro was soft, right? However, it is soft, but still shooting 17 under, you can't miss. And there's only a couple holes that he did miss, and those are the ones that you kind of expect not to get a birdie on anyway. So he was pretty much unconscious. He claimed it to be basically one of the easiest rounds in the sense that like there was just everything went his way. And I think that's what you kind of have to have happen on a course like that, because there are some holes that are a little tricky to get the birdie. But I'm going to step back a little bit from my take of where I thought it was one of the best rounds, like a top 5 round. I think the best round is probably 18 under at D-Glow with Paul. I think initially I kind of put James ahead of that one, but thinking about it more and Yuli kind of brought it up and I thought about it. There are so many holes on that you can really get into trouble and shoot some high scores. And there's not too many holes like that on Jonesboro. So to me, that's what gives it the nod. And then also hole 18, they both had to make big putts. I think James was like 40 or 45 feet. And then Paul was like 50 or something up the hill to get it. So it was both of them had that kind of, cherry on top, if you will, at the very end of the round.
Yeah, certainly. So you kind of put it at number 2 though, like right after.
It would be hard for me to put something ahead of it.
It does get a little blurry, I will say, like after you kind of pick number 1 with those best rounds. Dustin, where do you have it?
All right. So while Jonesboro is not one of the most difficult courses on tour, it certainly isn't Fountain Hills or like a pitch and putt course. And so I think there are enough challenging holes and no some holes that aren't really even gimmies to where, grabbing birdies are huge. Also, in this case, his 17 under, even if the course was soft, was still 4 strokes better than the next person. So like there was still a decent amount of separation. And I think in the end, a 17 under par is impressive because you're nearly shooting a perfect round. And no matter where that is, I think it's going to go down as a great round. Now, with that said, some things that are going to take it down a couple notches compared to some other of the great rounds is that the round wasn't from the leader chase card. So that pressure wasn't there. He wasn't in contention for like he wants a finishing 6th, so it doesn't happen for a win. And so I think some of those factors take away from the prestige of the round in comparison to some other great rounds in disc golf history. So for example, it won't be remembered nearly as much as Macbeth's 18 under at D-Glow in 2018 because it helped him win. It won't be remembered as much as Macbeth's 18 under at Waco, which also helped lead to a win. And I would even argue Macbeth's 16 under at the Champions Cup could eclipse this round from Conrad because I think it's a more difficult course. And I even think Freeman's 14 under at the Butler County Disc Golf Classic, because that course was insane, and he shot a 14 under there. So I think you could say because of the difficulty of the course, a round like that's in contention. So point is, I think it's a fantastic round. It's a special accomplishment, but it wasn't a perfect, 18 under like some of these others have been. And I would still say it's top 5 though.
Yeah, I think it is. It is tough to like an 18 under ultimately does just have a different ring to it. Obviously, you could say what you want about par. Brodie, you don't think that the 16 under at Champions Cup was more impressive?
Well, he kind of just went against what he was saying. Like he was like on the 12th card or something when he did the 16 under at Champions Cup.
Well, but he's saying that the Conrad round doesn't have that either. So it's fair.
I'll say this:
two.
I don't think it's that impressive because I think Isaac would have shot. I think there would have been multiple people that would have shot 16 under, maybe even better, if the course was the same this year.
That's
the course.
Like
the course got
speculation.
the course got. Well, I'm just saying the course got harder this year.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it is subjective.
And there was multiple people.
It's subjective.
Well, I mean, you can't eagle a couple of the holes that were eagleable, and like there's two holes that he eagled that you can't eagle anymore. That's
Hunter,
2 shots right there.
There's one round that neither of you mentioned that I know Hunter favors as well. Do you know which one I'm referring to, Hunter?
Yeah, the 45 at Maple Hill.
The Maple Hill round was another one.
Ooh, see, I don't know. I don't even know about that one.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
That was what, 15 down or 14
or 15. I forget what the par was, but yeah.
Is the course the same it is right now?
I would it hasn't changed that much.
It's
Maple Hill is one of those
close,
courses that doesn't change that much.
To me, that's the thing that's tough is like the Waco round.
I don't have the Waco up there because that one
gets thrown out.
It's like a Waco. The 18 under at Waco is like 15 under nowadays. I think once you change the course. But I think, in my opinion, I don't really get to have an opinion, but Conrad's is 4. Conrad's is 4 because you have Macbeth 18 under at D-Glow. You just put out a stat. You were literally more likely to be struck by lightning. I think it was multiple times than someone was to birdie and eagle everything. Like they broke it down. You can find it on UDIS.
It's a crazy round.
Fascinating article. It was like the statistics based on the whole field of getting all those holes in one round. It was insane. Nothing has ever come close to that. So 18 under at D-Glow. In my opinion, having played WR Jackson, I understand it's softer than many people expected. The 16 under at WR Jackson is insane. I put the 45 at Maple Hill. Then I go Conrad. Then I went Freeman. That was my top 5.
The Freeman one is tough because there's just not a lot
of
precedent.
There's
not a lot of precedent. But that one, if they continue playing that course, that round could get more and more impressive. But in any case, Dustin does edge out Brodie by just 1 point. Unfortunately, Brodie had a great show, but the Ezra steal, I think, was pivotal there.
I wish I would have had
his course record, though, with an asterisk thing is a terrible take, though, Trevor, and you know that.
What are you talking about?
A good round, you don't have to win the tournament to have it to be a good round. Like when you go and look at the course records at a tournament, you don't go, "Oh, what place did he finish?"
What did I say that?
20th?
What are you talking about?
Macbeth lost.
Macbeth
lost.
That's what Dustin was saying.
Under.
No. He just said a round could be more significant whenever you were playing. I agree that a round under heavy pressure would be more significant and impressive. I completely agree with that. If you shot 18 under in the final round to win under pressure, that's more impressive than doing it round 2. I firmly agree with that. Dustin.
Well, what about for the people that don't care about winning, getting second?
Huh?
Do the first or last. That's really impressive then.
That's
nobody on the
Go ahead. What round are you going to remember more down the road? Dustin, a win or not? That's all I'm getting at.
Dustin, have your moment. You are the winner today, Dustin.
You are the winner, man. No one will remember me.
Brodie, plenty of people remember you. And honestly, I do want to shout out Brodie's performance this show. I think this is your best performance, bro. You were killing it right there.
Let's stop that right now.
Right, dude. I could never shoot that well, dude. Brodie, if it were me, I could never have shot that well, dude.
If I was in the final round, dude, I could have never done it like that.
Yeah, dude, Brodie. I could never throw a drive that far, man. So you should be happy.
Oh, man.
All right, that was another episode of Debate Night. Hopefully you enjoyed. There's already things breaking in news, like as we speak, like literally right after we released things.
I'm surprised you didn't have the Gannon Burr thing on.
Well, it happened on the fly, so we'll talk about it next week, and we'll see you then for that episode.